Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Welcome to Wednesday, first Wednesday of March. Today's video is going to be about a historical figure from World War II. If you are a fan of military history, war history, or anything, you'll probably know who it is. If you don't, well, then you can look at the pretty pictures and learn something new. But before all that, we're going to have a race. Hang on a minute. As you can see, I've chosen, these are called space hoppers. They're kind of like balloons that you bounce on. So this should be an interesting race, hopefully. Hang on, it's decided it wants to... What are you doing? There we go. Alright, here we go. Let me paused. Okay, we've got South Dakota. Well, for Pete's. We've got South Dakota. We've got Adventures. There's Jason. Dave and Marcy. Kenny and Debbie. There's Amboys. South Dakota podcast. Adventures. There's Josie. There's Shadow. There's Black Beauty. There's Driving. There's Peach. There's Fawn. There's Trainer. There's Hillbilly. There's Lynn. There's Love and Live. Who we got? I think it might be Lynn. Give it to me. Oh, live can. Hang on a minute. Record. Alright, files. Joe's going to dive deep. Tell you something super serious. Almost interesting. Not quite interesting, but almost interesting.
Almost interesting.
Right.
Because, I originally, this was kind of, throwing out some wild oats. I took a class in 1990. Way back when. And it was kind of funny because the class I was taking, the country I was studying was disintegrating. I had taken a class on the Soviet Union because I needed it to graduate. I needed a government class. And it was both interesting because a lot of the time we did deep dives into history and the early roots of Russia, the Russian Empire. And the thing I always found funny with it was that the Russians, you either, depending on how you operated as the leader of the country, they could, Catherine the Great, Ivan the Terrible, they have certain ways that they would, highlight you as to, who you were and how you led the country. And, a lot of the time, pre-World War I, Russia, they were always, fighting on one front or another. Whether they were dealing with the Mongol hordes, whether, they were trying to stop annexation from the south, whether they were dealing with Germany, Poland, take your pick. But this latest subject that we've got, interestingly enough in history, delves around March the 5th, when one of their leaders would finally succumb and die. Needless to say, I'm kind of torn because, to a degree, this guy was pretty much one of the true evils that we had in history at the time. But to the benefit, he also helped us stop another truly bad guy in Adolf Hitler. Today's topic is going to be a deep dive on Joseph Stalin. Now, for those of you who want to take a nap, just put on the tape recorder and click record. You can listen to this in the book notes version. But you think about this guy. He was born in 1878 at that time it was Georgia. It was a part of the governorate of the Russian Empire, the Tripolis governorate in Gori, Georgia. His birth name was Joseph Vissarionovich Dezhazavi, russified as Joseph Vizanovich Dreskavili. And heaven forbid they'd want to let them keep their own language.
How dare you?
Let's manipulate it
How
and twist
dare
it.
you?
I know. Let's throw it out the window. His parents were Basaryan Dreskavili and Ekaterina Belzadi. Stalin was their third child, but the only one to survive past infancy. Well, after Basaryan's shoemaking workshop went into decline, the family would slide into poverty, and he became an alcoholic who would beat his wife and son.
Ooh, yay!
Ekaterina and her son left the home in 1883, moving through 9 different rented rooms. By 1888, Stalin enrolled at the Gori Church School, where he excelled. He faced health problems, though. In 1884, he suffered a smallpox infection that left him with facial scars, and at age 12, he was seriously injured when he was struck by a phaeton, causing a lifelong disability in his left arm. In 1894, Stalin would enroll as a trainee Russian Orthodox priest at the Tilfus Theological Seminary, enabled by a scholarship. He initially received high grades, but lost interest in his studies. Stalin became influenced by Nikolai Chernyshevsky's pro-revolutionary novel What Is to Be Done and Alan Katzberg's The Patricide, with Stalin adopting the nickname Koba from its bandit protagonist. After reading Das Kapital, Stalin focused on Karl Marx's philosophy of Marxism, which was on the rise in the variety of socialism opposed to the Tsarist authorities. He began attending secret workers' meetings and left the seminary in April of 1899. Now, during the October of 1899, he worked as a meteorologist at the Tilford Observatory, and he attracted a group of socialist supporters and co-organized a secret workers' meeting where he convinced many to strike on May Day 1900. The Empire's secret police, the Okhrana, became aware of Stalin's activities and attempted to arrest him in March of 1901, but he went into hiding, during which he lived off donations from friends. He helped plan a demonstration in Tilfus on May Day 1901, at which 3,000 marchers clashed with authorities. Stalin was elected to the Tiflis Committee of the Russian Socialist Democratic Labor Party, the RSDLP, a Marxist party founded in 1898 in November of 1901. Well, that month he traveled to Batumi. His militant rhetoric proved divisive among the city's Marxists, some of whom suspected that he was an agent provocateur. Stalin began working at the Rothschild refinery storehouses, where he co-organized 2 workers' strikes. After the strike leaders were arrested, he co-organized a mass demonstration which led to the storming of the prison. Now, Stalin was arrested in April of 1902 and sentenced to 3 years' exile in Siberia. Arriving at Novaya WWII in November of 1903. After one failed attempt, Stalin escaped from the exile in January of 1904. See, even he didn't like Siberia.
Right?
Escaped in January of 1904 and traveled to Tiflis, where he co-edited the Marxist newspaper Proletariat Resulta, or Proletarian Struggle, with Philippe Mazerotsky. During his exile, the RSDLP had become divided between Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik faction and Julius Martov's Menshevik. Stalin, who detested many of Mensheviks in Georgia, aligned himself with the Bolsheviks. Well, in January of 1905, government troops massacred protesters in St. Petersburg, and unrest would spread across the empire in the Revolution of 1905. Stalin was in Baku in February when ethnic violence broke out between Armenians and Azeris, and he turned Bolshevik battle squads where he used to keep the city's warring ethnic factions apart. It's like, guys, you go over there, you go over there. Quit pissing each other off. His armed squads attacked local police and troops and aided arsenals, raiding arsenals, and raised funds via protection rackets. It's like, hey, pay me some money. I'll keep you guys from fighting. In November of 1905, the Georgian Bolsheviks elected Stalin as one of their delegates to a Bolshevik conference in Tampere, Finland, where he met Lenin. Although Stalin held Lenin in a deep respect, he vocally disagreed with the view that the Bolsheviks should field candidates for the 1906 election to the State Duma. Stalin viewed the parliamentary process as a waste of time. In April of 1906, he attended the RSDLP's Fourth Congress in Stockholm, where the party, then led by Menshevik majority, agreed that it would not raise funds during an armed robbery. Lenin and Stalin disagreed with this and privately discussed continuing the robberies for the Bolshevik cause. Hey,
let's do more robberies.
Yeah, let's steal some money.
Robberies!
Money helps the world go round. Come on now. Well, Stalin married Kato Savandi in July of 1906, and in March 1907 she gave birth to their son, Yakov Stalin, who by now had established himself as Georgia's leading Bolshevik, organized this June 1907 robbery of a bank stagecoach in Tiflis to fund the Bolsheviks. His operatives ambushed the convoy in Aransky Square with guns and homemade bombs. Around 40 people were killed. Stalin settled in Baku with his wife and son, where Menshevik confronted him about the robbery and voted to expel him from the RSDLP, but he ignored them. Go on. Shoot. Beat it. You know, you're not in charge of me. Stalin secured Bolshevik domination of the RSDLP branch and edited 2 Bolshevik newspapers. In November of 1907, his wife died of typhus, and he left his son with her family in Tiflis. He then reassembled his gang, which attacked black hundreds and raised money through racketeering, counterfeiting, robberies, and kidnapping the children of wealthy figures for ransom. It sounds like somebody really wants to get in on the money.
Yes.
In March of 1908, Stalin was arrested and imprisoned. He led the imprisoned Bolsheviks, organized discussion groups, and ordered the killing of suspected informants. He was sentenced to 2 years exile in Soldagatsk in northern Russia, arriving there in February 1909. In June, Stalin escaped to St. Petersburg. They don't have much for prisons up there.
No.
That's twice he's escaped. He was arrested again in March of 1910, sent back. In June of 1911, Stalin was given permission to move to Volgodara, where he stayed for 2 months. He then escaped to St. Petersburg, where he was arrested yet again in September of 1911 and sentenced to a further 3 years of exile in Volgodara. Now, in January of 1912, the first Bolshevik Central Committee was elected at the Prague Conference. Lenin and Grigory Zamenhof decided to co-opt Stalin to the committee, which Stalin, who is still in exile, agreed to. Lenin believed that Stalin, as a Georgian, would help secure the support of the empire's minority ethnicities. In February of 1912, Stalin again escaped to St. Petersburg, where he was tasked with converting the Bolshevik weekly newspaper Zvezda, or Star, into a daily Pravda, Truth. The new newspaper was launched in April of 1912, and Stalin's role as editor was kept secret. In May of 1912, he was again arrested and sentenced to 3 years of exile in Siberia. In July, he arrived in Nurem, where he shared a room with fellow Bolshevik Yakov Sverdlov. After 2 months, they escaped to St. Petersburg. He just built an apartment there. I mean, good grief, he keeps showing up. Where Stalin continued to work on the Pravda. After October 12th Duma election, Stalin wrote articles calling for the reconciliation between the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks. Lenin criticized him, and he relented. In January 1913, Stalin traveled incognito using a false passport bearing the name of Saratos Papadoulos to Vienna, where he researched the national question of how the Bolsheviks should deal with the empire's national and ethnic minorities. His article, Marxism and the National Question, was first published in March, April, and May of 1913 issues of the Bolshevik journal Prozovetsky, or under the pseudonym K. Stalin. The Allies, which he had used since 1912, is derived from the Russian for steel, where it was translated as man of steel. In February 1913, Stalin was again arrested in St. Petersburg and sentenced to 4 years of exile in Turkanot in Siberia, where he arrived in August. Still concerned over a potential escape, the authorities moved him to Koreata in March of 1914. How long do you think he'll stay?
2 days.
Now, while Stalin was in exile, Russia entered the First World War, and in October 1916, he and other exiled Bolsheviks were conscripted into the Russian army. He arrived at Krasnoyarsk in February of 1917, where a medical examiner ruled Stalin unfit for service due to his crippled arm. Stalin was required to serve 4 more months of his exile and successfully requested it be served in Ashensk. Stalin was in the city when the February Revolution took place. The Tsar abdicated and the empire became a de facto republic. In a celebratory mood, Stalin traveled by train to Petrograd, as St. Petersburg had been renamed in March. He assumed control of the Pravda alongside Lev Kamenev and was appointed as a Bolshevik delegate to the executive committee of the Petrograd Soviet, an influential workers' council. Now, Stalin helped organize the July Days uprising, an armed display of strength by supporters of the Bolsheviks. After the demonstration was suppressed, the provisional government initiated a crackdown on the party, raiding Pravda. Stalin smuggled Lenin out of the paper's office and took charge of his safety, moving in between Petrograd safe houses before smuggling him to nearby Roslav. In Lenin's absence, Stalin continued editing the Pravda and served as the acting leader of the Bolsheviks, overseeing the party's 6th Congress. Lenin began calling for the Bolsheviks to seize power by toppling the provincial government, a plan which was supported by Stalin and fellow senior Bolshevik Leon Trotsky, but opposed by Kamenev, Zhivnev, and other members. On the 24th of October, police raided the Bolshevik newspaper offices, smashing machinery and presses. Stalin salvaged some of the equipment. In the early hours of the 25th of October, Stalin joined Lenin in a Central Committee meeting in Petrograd's Smolny Institute, from where the Bolshevik coup, the October Revolution, was directed. Bolshevik militia seized Petrograd's power station, main post office, state bank, telephone exchange, and several bridges. A Bolshevik-controlled ship, the Aurora, opened fire on the Winter Palace. The provisional government's assembled delegates surrendered and were arrested. Stalin, who had been tasked with briefing the Bolshevik delegates of the Second Congress of Soviets about the situation, had not played publicly a visible role. Trotsky and other later opponents used this as evidence his role had been insignificant, though various historians reject this, placing great significance in his role as a member of the Central Committee and as the editor of the Pravda. However, according to Russian historian Oleg Korenskik, in 2015, Russia was not allowed to follow the course of reform long enough to yield significant results through Stalin's frequent abuse of power and misdirecting the course of the revolution. Well, in October 1917, the 26th, Lenin declared himself chairman of the new government of the Council of the People's Commissars. The Stalin supported Lenin's decision not to form a coalition with the Soviet Revolutionary Party. He became part of the informal leadership group alongside Lenin, Trotsky, and Smirnov, with the importance within the Bolshevik ranks group. Stalin's office was near Lenin's in the Smolny Institute, and he and Trotsky had direct access to Lenin without an appointment. Stalin co-signed Lenin's decrees, shutting down hostile newspapers, and co-chaired the committee drafting a constitution for the newly formed Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. There's a lot of letters. He supported Lenin's formation for the Cheka Security Service and the Red Terror, arguing that state violence was an effective tool for capitalist powers. Unlike some Bolsheviks, Stalin never expressed concern about the Cheka rapid expansion in their Red Terror. Having left this role as Pravda editor, Stalin was appointed the People's Commissar for Nationalities. He appointed Nezhda Alyetka as his secretary and married her in early of 1919. In November of 1917, he signed the decree on nationality, granting ethnic minorities the right to secession and self-determination. He traveled to Helsinki to meet with the French Social Democrats and granted Finland's request for independence from Russia in December. Due to threats posed by the First World War in March of 1918, the government relocated from Petrograd to the Moscow Kremlin. Stalin supported Lenin's desire to sign an armistice with the Central Powers. Stalin thought this necessary because, unlike Lenin, was unconvinced that Europe was on the verge of proletarian revolution. Now, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed in March of 1918, ceded vast territories and angered many. The left socialist revolutionaries withdrew from the coalition government. The Bolsheviks were then renamed the Russian Communist Party. In May of 1918, during the intensifying Russian Civil War, Staromkin sent Stalin to transfer him to take charge of food procurement in southern Russia. Eager to prove himself as commander, he took control of the regional military operations and befriended Kelmek Vrashkov and Semyon Bashrani, who later formed the core of the military support base. Stalin sent large numbers of the Red Army troops to battle the region's white armies, resulting in heavy losses and drawing Lenin's concern. In Trotsky, Stalin commanded the local Cheka branch to execute suspected counter-revolutionaries, often without trial, and purge the military and food collection agencies of middle-class specialists who were also executed. Nice guy.
Yes.
His use of the state violence as a greater scale that most Bolshevik leaders approved of. For instance, he ordered several villages torched to ensure compliance with his food procurement program. And remember, this is the guy that had a habit of, he enjoyed wiping out villages, making people starve for Mother Russia. This was his big kick. This was what he lived for. Now, in December of 1918, Stalin was sent to Perm to lead an inquiry into how Alexander Kolchak's white forces had been able to decimate red troops there. He returned to Moscow in January 1919 before being assigned to the Western Front in Petrograd. When the Red Third Regiment defected, he ordered the public execution of captured defectors. In September, he returned to the Southern Front, and during the war, Stalin proved his worth in the Central Committee by displaying decisiveness and determination. However, he also disregarded orders and repeatedly threatened to resign when affronted. In November of 1919, the government awarded the Order of the Red Banner for his service. Now, the Bolsheviks won the main phase of the Civil War by the end of 1919. By that time, Stroganov had turned his attention to spreading totalitarian revolution abroad, forming the Communist International in March of 1919. Stalin attended his inaugural ceremony. Although Stalin did not share Lenin's belief the Europe's proletariat were on the verge of revolution, he acknowledged the Soviet Russia remained vulnerable. In February of 1920, he was appointed as the Workers and Peasants Inspectorate. That same month, he was also transferred to the Caucasian Front. Now, the Polish-Soviet War broke out early 1920 with the Poles invading Ukraine. And in May, Stalin was moved to the Southwest Front. Lenin believed that the Polish proletariat would rise up to support an invasion, but Stalin argued that the nationalism would lead them to support their government's war effort. Stalin lost the argument and accepted Lenin's decision. On this front, Stalin became determined to conquer Lwów, and focusing on this goal, he disobeyed orders to transfer his troops to assist Mikhail Trotsky's forces at the Battle of Warsaw in early August, which ended in a major defeat for the Red Army. Stalin then returned to Moscow, where Trotsky blamed him for the loss. Humiliated, he demanded demission from the military, which was granted on the 1st of September. At the Ninth Party Congress in late September, Trotsky accused Stalin of strategic mistakes and claimed that he had sabotaged the campaign. Lenin joined him in the criticism. Stalin felt disgraced, and his antipathy towards Trotsky increased. Now, the Soviet government sought to bring neighboring states under its dominance. In February 1921, it invaded Menshevik-governed Georgia, and in April of 21, Stalin ordered the Red Army into Turkestan to assert Soviet control. As People's Commissar for Nationalities, Stalin believed that each ethnic group had a right to an autonomous republic within the Russian states in which it could oversee various regional affairs. In taking this view, some Marxists accused him of bending too much for his bourgeois nationalism, while others accused him of remaining too Russo-centric. In his diverse native caucus, however, Stalin opposed the idea of separate autonomous republics, arguing that these would oppose ethnic minorities within their territories. Instead, he called for a Transcaucasian Socialist Federative Socialist Republic. The Georgian Communist Party opposed this idea, resulting in the Georgian Affair in mid-1921. Stalin returned to the South Caucasus, calling on Georgian communists to reject the chauvinistic regionalism which had marginalized the Abkhaz, Ossetin, and Abkharian minorities. In March of 1921, Nezhdan gave birth to another of Stalin's sons, Vasily. After the Civil War, workers' strikes and peasant uprisings broke out across Russia in opposition to the Tsareniko's food requesting project.
Oh,
In response, who wants food?
how dare you?
Yeah. Lenin introduced a market-oriented reforms in the new economic policy. There was also turmoil when the Communist Party, as Trotsky led a faction calling for the abolition of trade unions. Lenin opposed this, and Stalin helped rally opposition to Trotsky's position. At the 11th Party of Congress in March and April of 22, Lenin nominated Stalin as the party's general secretary, which was intended as a purely organizational role. Although concerns were expressed that adopting the new position would overstretch his workload and grant him too much power, Stalin was appointed to the post. In May of 1922, a massive stroke left Lenin partially paralyzed. Residing in the Gorky dacha, his main connection to stronger Rome was through Stalin. Despite his comradeship, Lenin disliked what he referred to as Stalin's Asiatic manner and told his sister Maria that Stalin was not intelligent. The two men argued on issues of foreign trade. Lenin believed that the Soviet state should have a monopoly on foreign trade, but Stalin supported the Grigory Strokerin's view that doing so was impractical. Another disagreement came over the Georgian affair, with Lenin backing the Georgian Central Committee's desire for a Georgian Soviet Republic over Stalin's idea of the Transcaucasian one. There was also a disagreement on the nature of the Soviet state. Lenin called for the establishment of a new federation named the Union of Soviet Republics of Europe and Asia. This guy's got a lot of things for names.
Right?
While Stalin believed that this would encourage independence sentiment among non-Russians, Lenin accused Stalin of great Russian chauvinism, while Stalin accused Lenin of national liberalism. A compromise was reached in which the federation would be named the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, whose formation was ratified in December of 1922. Other differences became personal. Lenin was angered when Stalin was rude to his wife Kostya during a telephone conversation. In the final years of his life, Kostya provided leading figures in Lenin's testament, which criticized Stalin's rule, manner, and excessive power, and suggestions that he be removed as general secretary. Some historians have questioned whether Lenin wrote the document, suggesting it was written by Kostya. Stalin never publicly voiced concerns about its authenticity. Most historians consider it an accurate reflection of Lenin's views. Well, after Lenin died, January 1924, Stalin took charge of the funeral and was even a pallbearer.
Oh dear.
To bolster his image as a devoted Leninist and then his growing personality cult, Stalin gave 9 lectures at Svedrod University on the foundation of Leninism, later published in book form. At the 12th Party of Congress in May of 1924, Lenin's testament was read only to the leaders of the provincial delegations. Embarrassed by its contents, Stalin offered his resignation as general secretary. This act of humility saved him, and he was retained to the post. As general secretary, Stalin had a free hand in making appointments to his own staff and implemented loyalists throughout his party, favoring new members from the Quartalian backgrounds into old Bolsheviks who tended to be middle-class university graduates. He ensured that he had loyalists dispersed among his regions. Stalin had much contact with the young party functionaries, and the desire for promotion to many seek his favor. Stalin also developed close relations with key figures in his secret police, Felix Dzerzhanyt, Greenwich Yagada, and Yashev Menensky. His wife gave birth to a daughter, Svetlana, in February of 1926. Now, in the wake of Lenin's death, a power struggle emerged to become successor. Alongside Stalin was Trotsky, Zinonev, Kamenev, Nikolai Bukharin, Alexei Rykov, and Mikhail Tomsky. Stalin saw Trotsky, whom he personally despised, as the main obstacle to his dominance, and during Lenin's illness had formed an unofficial triumvirate, or troika, alongside Kamensky and Zinoviev. Although Zinoviev was concerned about Stalin's growing power, he rallied behind him at the 13th Congress as a counterweight to Trotsky, who now led a faction known as the Left Opposition. Trotsky's supporters believed that the new NEP conceded too much to capitalism, and they called Stalin a rightist for his support of the policy. Stalin built up a retinue of supporters within the Central Committee, and the left opposition were marginalized. In late 1924, Stalin moved against Kamenev and Zinonev, removing their supporters from key positions, and in 1925, the two moved into open opposition to Stalin and Bukharov, and launched an unsuccessful attack on their faction at the 14th Party Congress in December. Stalin accused Kamenev and Zinoviev of reintroducing factionalism and thus instability. In mid-1925, Konrav and Zinoviev joined with Trotsky to form the United Opposition against Stalin, and in October the two agreed to stop factional activity under the threat of expulsion, and later publicly recanted their views. This factionalist arguments continued, with Stalin threatening to assign in October and December 1926 to resign, take that back, and again in December 1927. It's like whenever I'm getting pissed, I'm going to threaten to resign. You guys can handle the ship. Go for it. Have some fun.
That seems like a good reason to resign, though.
Yeah.
I'm angry at you, so I resign.
Everybody at everybody else's throat, You guys have some fun.
We'll figure it out.
Later. But, Stalin was now the supreme leader of the party and the state. His entrusted position of the head of government to Yaskov Molotov. Other important supporters of the Politburo were Voloshinov, Lazar Karnovich, and Sergio Okhodrany. If you can't tell, I have no idea how to pronounce half these names in Russian. I apologize. But
you're doing better than I would do.
They're some really fun names.
I won't butcher them all.
Stalin ensuring his allies ran state institutions. His growing influence were reflected in the naming of locations after him. In June of 1924, the Ukrainian city of Yuskova became Stalino. In April of 1925, Terzartan was renamed Stalingrad. And in 1926, Stalin published the Questions of Leninism, in which he argued for the concept of socialism in one country, which he presented in orthodox Leninist perspectives, despite clashing with the established Bolsheviks' views of socialism could only be achieved globally through the process of world revolution. In 1927, there were some arguments in the party over Soviet policy regarding China. Stalin had called the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, to ally himself with Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang. Kuomintang nationalists, viewing the CCP-KMT alliance as the best bulwark against Japanese imperialism. Instead, the KMT repressed the CCP, and a civil war would break out between the two sides. They love fighting with each other.
Fight.
Now, the joys of economics, one of the first things the Soviets loved to do was known as the 5-year plan. Basically, they would set out specific goals for these countries to take and use, and, they would expect absolute miracles to come out of it. The Soviet Union was lagging far behind in the industrial and agricultural development of the Western powers. Stalin's government feared attack from capitalist countries, and many communists, including the Komsomol, OGPU, and the Red Army, were eager to be rid of the new economic policy and its market-oriented approach. They had concerns about those who profited from the policy, affluent peasants known as kulaks, and small business owners or netmen. At this point, Stalin turned against the NEP, which put him on course to the left even of Trotsky or Zinoviev. Well, in early 28, Stalin traveled to Novosibirsk, where he aligned with the kulaks, where he alleged that the kulaks were hoarding grain and ordered them to be arrested and their grain confiscated. Stalin bringing much of the grain back to Moscow with him in February. At his command, grain procurement squads surfaced across western Siberia and the Urals, with violence breaking out between the squads and the peasantry. Stalin announced that the kulaks and the middle peasants must be coerced into releasing their harvest. Milgram and other centrist committee members were angered that they had not even been consulted about this measure. In January of 1930, the Politburo approved the liquidation of the kulak class, which was exiled to other parts of the country or concentration camps. By July of 1930, over 320,000 households had been affected. According to Dmitry Volkanov, this mass terror applied by Stalin in his own country, it's just brutal. Now, in 1929, the Politburo announced the mass collectivism of agriculture, establishing both Kukov's collective farms and Soskov's state farms. Although officially voluntary, many peasants joined the collectives out of fear that they would face the fate of the kulaks. In 1932, about 62% of households involved in agriculture were part of collectives, and by 1936, this had risen to 90%. Many collectivized peasants resented the loss of their private farmland, and productivity would slump. Famine broke out in many areas, with the Politburo frequently being forced to dispatch emergency food relief. Armed peasant uprisings broke out in the Ukraine, North Caucasus, southern Russia, and Central Asia, reaching the apex in March of 1930. These were suppressed by the army, and Stalin responded with an article insisting that collectivism was voluntary and blaming violence on local officials. Although he and Stalin had been close for many years, Bukharin expressed concerns and regarded them as a return to Lenin's old war communism policy. By mid-1928, he was unable to rally sufficient support to the party in opposition of the reforms, and in November 1929, Stalin removed him from the Politburo. Now, interesting item, war communism, keep that name in mind, because that's going to come around.
Communism.
Now, officially, the Soviet Union had replaced the irrationality and wastefulness of a market economy, with a planned economy organized along with long-term and a scientific framework. In reality, Soviet economics were based on ad hoc commandments issued often to make short-term targets. In 1928, the first 5-year plan was launched by Stalin with the main focus of boosting Soviet heavy industry. It was finished a year ahead of schedule in 1932. The country underwent a massive economic transformation. New mines were opened, new cities like Manaorsk constructed, and the work of the White Sea-Baltic Canal began. Millions of peasants moved to the cities, and large debts were accrued purchasing foreign-made machinery. Of course, they also don't want to tell you that a lot of people starved to death because this move from the greens and the farming had slight,
How dare you?
economic impact, yeah.
How dare
you? Now, many construction impacts, this White Sea Canal, the Moscow Metro, were constructed largely through forced labor. Yeah, we're not going to let you farm. We're going to force you to dig tunnels. Great.
you? You wanted tunnels anyway, right?
Exactly. And the last elements were workers' control over industry were removed and the factory managers receiving privileges, Stalin defended wage disparity by pointing to Marx's argument that it was necessary during lower stages of socialism to promote intensification of labor. Medals and awards were delivered. You can really eat those medals, can't you?
Right?
The I'm not going to be able to butcher that one. Starkafrati movement was introduced. Stalin argued that socialism was being established in the USSR while capitalism was crumbling during the Great Depression. This rhetoric reflected his utopian vision of the new Soviet person rising to the unparalleled heights of human development. Now, in 1928, Stalin declared this class war between the proletariat and his enemy would intensify as socialism developed. He warned of a danger from the right, including from within the Communist Party. The first show trial of the USSR was the Shanki trial of 1928, in which middle-class industrial specialists were convicted of sabotage. From 1929 to 1930, show trials were held to intimidate opposition. These included the Industrial Party trial, Menshevik trial, and the Menshevik trial. Aware that the ethnic Russian majority may have concerns about being ruled by a Georgian, he promoted ethnic Russians throughout the state bureaucracy and made Russian compulsory in schools, albeit at tandem with local languages. Nationalist sentiment was suppressed. Conservative social policies were promoted to boost production growth. This included focusing strong family units, the recriminalization of homosexuality, restrictions on abortion and divorce, and abolition of the Zenodel Women's Department. Stalin desired a cultural revolution, entailing both the creation of a culture for the masses and a wider dissemination of previously elite culture. He overcame a proliferation of schools, newspapers, and libraries, as well as the advancement of literacy and numeracy. Socialist realism was promoted throughout the arts, while Stalin wooed prominent writers, namely Maxim Gorky, Mikhail Shamansky, and Alexei Navalny Tolstoy. He expressed patronage for scientists whose research fit within the preconceived interpretations of Marxism. For instance, he endorsed the research of agrobiologist Trofim Lysenko, despite the fact that it was rejected by the majority of Lysenko's scientific peers as pseudoscientific. Heaven forbid.
Those seem like made-up words.
Oh, yeah. We love made-up words. Now, yes, Stalin, of course, was trying to get everything. One of the big things to keep in mind here is that Stalin liked you as long as he could control you. When Stalin got to a point when either you ran out of usability or you started questioning him, that was when things really got bad. Because when you have a place called Siberia, your problems disappear.
Oh, do they?
And usually, going out to the gulags was not looked at as a fun picnic.
But it sounds like a very fun field trip.
Yeah, let's go out and freeze to death. It just seems so warm and cuddly. I don't know if you'd want to feed the polar bears, but
somebody's got to feed them, right?
Exactly. And the thing that they came to also realize is that, they got done with World War I. Russia was tweaking with its economic policies at the time. People in the Ukraine were starving to death because they couldn't grow food like they used to. And it basically started laying the way before World War II happened. When World War II finally, reared its ugly head, Stalin had sent out feelers. He got in touch with a few people in the Nazi Party and said, listen, I got an idea. We're going to have a non-aggression pact. You don't attack us, we don't attack you. If you want, we'll even send supplies into your country. Just, and what was crazy is they split Poland up. Poland was actually fighting really heroically against Nazi Germany. And then all of a sudden they stabbed him in the back.
Oops.
And it really frustrated the heck out of a lot of people. England was like, hey, Stalin, what the hell are you doing over here? And of course, already England was in trouble because they had sent Neville Chamberlain to talk to Hitler. And Hitler had made the statement, oh, I'm not going to take anything else, maybe just a little bit over here. And then it came World War II. Now, what was also a surprise to both sides was that after this had happened, Hitler hit the brakes. Everybody was expecting this front to just burst into flames. Never did. Not right away. Hitler was able to move his forces after occupying Poland, shift them to the west, and then when the time was right, he went ahead and invaded the Netherlands. He invaded through Belgium, bypassed the Maginot Line in France. Hitler cut off the forces at Dunkirk, which, if Hitler would have went ahead and just bombed the heck out of Dunkirk, England would have really been in a tight spot. But it turned out to be a really good rerouting of forces, because a lot of those soldiers they saved off the beaches would later come back into use, which is pretty cool. Now, back to our buddy Stalin. Stalin, can we talk a minute?
No.
No. Now, you think about World War II, and a lot of the people look at the way anybody who's ever invaded Russia or the Soviet Union has always done the dumb thing. They go so far and then they run out of time. Because Napoleon did it. Hitler almost got away with it. The problem Hitler ran into was, first of all, they got within shelling range. They got to Tula. They were that close to Moscow. But, besides the fact that, Hitler was taking a number of his generals out and, replacing them with loyalists, they were tearing down their factories and rebuilding them back by the Ural Mountains. So they could continue rebuilding. There were a number of large armies that the Soviets lost because they got surrounded by the advancing German armies, the SS Corps. But Stalin played kind of a card out of one of his sleeves. He invoked Mother Russia.
Oh no.
He talked the people into, you'll fight for Mother Russia against the Nazis and Hitler and his evil. And what was interesting is that it really wasn't a choice a lot of these folks had to do, because he was emptying out camps and he was emptying out prisons, and basically he was saying, well, you have two choices. You can go forward or you can get shot in the back. Now, the one thing I do find kind of funny is that one of the biggest battles that they had at Stalingrad, they literally were sending troops across the river fighting. And they were, some of them didn't even have ammunition in the guns they had. Some of them didn't even have guns. But their idea was that they were going to run the Germans out of supplies before they destroyed their army. And, you know, it did that day after day, burning off German bullets with, you know, all these Soviet soldiers. Even the Cossacks were coming from Central Asia to try to fight the Germans. And of course, some of those soldiers were not exactly very human-like people either. They loved to kill, mutilate people, just all sorts of fun stuff. The Germans had no idea what was waiting for them. And eventually, the army around Stalingrad was just completely, they were surrounded and wiped out, marched into captivity. But eventually, the Soviets, thanks to the creative battle methods of Zhukov, helped along by Stalin's re-invoking of the Mother Russia image, the Allies were able to defeat Nazi Germany. And later on, even captured a few bits and pieces of Japan's property that was originally theirs in the first place. But now, for all the craziness that was going on with Stalin, with the purges, with World War II, it all came down to the fact that, you know, Stalin was just a brutal guy. You know, he was big. He had really unique abilities as far as leading men, but he didn't have a lot for compassion. Exasperated by repeated imprisonments and exiles. I imagine as many times as he was put into Siberia, he probably had no qualms about sending other people to Siberia.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's just like,
I go, you go.
Yeah. By all means, you can enjoy this icebox like the rest of us. Now, towards the end, Stalin would actually have a stroke. And what was kind of crazy is that he had such a fear of people that would approach him. They did not want to go and check to see if he was okay or not. So, you know, he's in the other room dying of a stroke, and nobody wanted to see if, you know, do we actually want to go in here and check on our beloved leader?
How dare you?
And if I remember it, it was like almost 3 days that he stayed in his happy, you know, room. Let's see if I got the actual date here. Some of the crazy enough, Stalin's second wife was Nazita Aliata, who he married in 1919. Though it was not an easy relationship, they often fought. They had 2 biological children, Vasily and a daughter, Savannah. Adopted another son, Atram Sergeyev, in 21. It's unclear if Stalin had a mistress during or after this marriage. She suspected he was unfaithful and committed suicide in 1932.
Well then.
Stalin regarded Vasily as spoiled and often chastised his behavior. As Stalin's son, he was swiftly promoted through the Red Army and allowed a lavish lifestyle. Conversely, Stalin had an affectionate relationship with Savannah during her childhood and was very fond of Atram. He disapproved of Savannah's suitors and husbands, which put a strain on their relationship. After World War II, he made little time for his children, and his family played a diminishing role in his life. After Stalin's death, Savannah changed her surname to Alturia and defected to the U.S.
Oh dear.
Bye, Dad.
Guess I completely blame her.
But yeah, I could just imagine that, you know, over the course of time, he, you know, as far as the post-war era, you know, the country slowly started to try to adjust to this new Soviet form of government, the use of these 5-year plans. Of course, there was thousands of prisoners that were captured. You know, German soldiers. It was straight out crazy. Something like 2.7 million were interrogated and determined if they were traitors. About half of them were imprisoned in labor camps. So much for your own soldiers, right?
What?
By January of 1953, 3% of the Soviet population was imprisoned.
Oh dear.
Yeah, guys, can we
I guess
let some of these
3%.
guys out?
3% isn't that many, right?
Yeah.
It's only like a couple, right?
Yeah, the NKVD, their version of the, what do you want to call it, Secret Service, recorded that between 26 and 27 million Soviet citizens had been killed during the war, you know, heaven forbid. Capital punishment was abolished in 1947, reinstituted in 1950. Stalin's health would deteriorate, but he grew increasingly concerned that senior figures might try to oust him. He would demote Molotov, increasingly favored Beria and Mountkoff for key positions. In the Leningrad affair, the city's leadership was purged and accusations of treachery. Executions of many of the accused took place in 1950. In the post-war periods, there were often food shortages in Soviet cities, and the USSR experienced a major famine in 1946 to 1947, sparked by a drought and the ensuing bad harvest in 1946, exacerbated by the government policy towards food procurement, including the state's decision to build up stocks and export food rather than distributing it to the famine-hit areas. You're starving, but we're giving away your food.
Cool.
Yeah.
I don't need it, right?
No. Highly overrated. But as far as, you know, Stalin went, you know, you have to give him credit for being the standing up force against Adolf Hitler.
Excuse me.
You also do have to realize is that he was very cunning, because, you know, he saw the end of World War II coming, and he wanted to go to that negotiating table and say, hey, you know, our forces have been bleeding and dying over here. We want some security on the Eastern Front. It might take a few countries. Of course, we also know how the Russian mayor like to, you know, hold people against their will.
Oh, how dare you! You would never do such a thing.
Of course they would. You know, after all, let's see, East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Albania, Romania. I mean, Greece thankfully stayed out of the Soviet bear's grip. Italy almost fell, and then of course Switzerland was always the great, you know, neutral party of the whole thing. But yeah, he would wind up passing away on March 5th, 1953, at the ripe old age of 74 in Moscow, the Soviet Union. He is presently resting in the, well, first he started out in Lenin's mausoleum in 1953 to 1961.
Right.
And then they moved him to the Kremlin Wall necropolis. And he's been there since 1961.
Fun.
But had 4 kids, Yakov Dostoevsky, Vasily Stalin, Artyom Sergeyev, the adopted one, and Svetlana Babulenko. Parents Belsarian Jovishky and Eklina Kovalsky. But it's one of those guys that, you know, on one hand, you'd like, you know, this was a guy who was evil, cunning, but he also had a cult of personality about him. Because, you know, I mean, Lenin looked at him and said, you know, here's somebody that we can use in the Communist Party. Here's a guy that, you know, was really good at writing newspapers as an editor. And then you also looked at him and you went, this guy is completely gonzo.
Yeah,
But the right guy in the right situation, could they have done something different in World War II? I don't know.
probably not.
I know they needed somebody strong over here, otherwise Hitler would have broke through, probably gone down and captured the oil fields in Iran, Persia at the time, and then we really would have been in trouble. But
Aren't we always in trouble, though?
one way or another.
Okay.
Yeah. But this has been the Bearded Historian for a little look back at a guy who had a stroke and saved all our lives.
Did he?
Well, I don't know if you could call it saving all our lives, but
So nothing.
yeah. I would give him a 50-50.
50-50.
Yeah, because on one hand,
That seems generous.
he had to do something to stop Hitler, but at the same time, he did it capturing a lot of free countries and holding them hostage for multiple years. So, but we will see you guys next week. Have fun. Talk to you later.
Do we have to?
Probably.
Over an hour.
Yeah.
An hour and 3 minutes.
Yay. I can